When I moved into my new place, I was just looking for a fresh start. I won't get into the details, but let's just say I had a bad situation with an ex that made staying in my old city impossible. I ran into some money early in life and made some bad decisions about the kind of women I surrounded myself with. Lesson learned. The neighborhood I moved to is really nice. Low crime, quiet, mostly families. The houses here are really spaced out, which was partially what drew me there. But for some reason, the property next to mine is much closer in proximity than most of the other properties are to each other. And by the way, that house next door is huge. When I first saw it, I thought I could easily fit a family of 10. That's honestly what I assumed at first, that a big family lived there, grandparents and everything. But I could not have been more wrong. Even though I try to be low-key, I wasn't going to be a rude neighbor. I took it upon myself to introduce myself to everyone in the neighborhood. For whatever reason, I decided to introduce myself to my next-door neighbors last. I couldn't tell you why. Everyone else I met seemed really sweet and genuine. I'd say 90% of them were parents of young children. And yes, they were all slightly intimidating, purely based on how successful they seemed to be. I wasn't too sure how a younger guy like myself would easily blend into a community like that, but that was more of a personal concern. When I got around to meeting my next-door neighbor, my social battery was mostly drained from having spent the day making small talk with strangers. I knew if I just went back home, I was never going to be as motivated to meet them, so I just sucked it up and walked up their driveway. I had gotten accustomed to being greeted by someone middle-aged, so when a young-looking dude in a mullet opened the door, I was a little taken aback. Hell, he looked even younger than me, which was definitely a shock. I recovered quickly and went ahead with my new-to-the-neighborhood spiel. As I went on, he flashed me this massive smile and actually cut me off before I could even finish talking. He said something along the lines of, "Oh wow, someone who was born in my decade, what a nice surprise." I laughed and told him the same thing, venting to him about how out of place I felt as a single guy in his late 20s among so many families with kids. He told me not to worry about that and that most of the people who lived here kept to themselves, which was kind of a relief for me. He introduced himself as Marcus and told me I should come by for a drink sometime. I shrugged my shoulders and said, "Hell, why not right now?" To which I expected him to laugh and invite me in. Instead, though, he looked over his shoulder like he was scanning his living room, and then he turned back to me, saying he wished he could, but was busy working. I asked him what he did for work, because it just seemed like a normal follow-up question to what he said, and he dropped his smile a bit. After a weird stare, he laughed and just said, "Finance," but didn't elaborate any more than that, which I thought was a bit strange. I told him, fair enough, and Beatty if he had any roommates. To my surprise, he told me he lived there alone, which was absolutely insane to me given how big the house was. We chit-chatted for a few more minutes, and he gave me his number before going back inside. I was excited that someone my age lived here, especially because he seemed like a really chill guy, but I couldn't get over how odd it was for someone like that to live all alone. And yeah, I know I was essentially doing the same thing, but you have to keep in mind my house wasn't even half the size of his. Anyway, I went back home and got on with my life. That was about 6 months ago. For a few weeks after that, nothing eventful really happened. I texted Marcus a few days after he gave me his number to try and set something up, but he'd always complain about how busy he was and how sorry he was that we couldn't hang out. Eventually, I gave up with him, not in a hostile way, just in a you-do-you kind of way. I'm not the type of person to bend over backwards for someone who seems disinterested. I never saw anyone coming or going from Marcus's place. No visitors, no parties, no girls, nothing. He never even got takeout delivered, which was strange to me because his car was always in the driveway. I genuinely didn't know what he ate because I literally never saw him leave the house. The guy lived like a ghost. I work from home, and the office in my house is on the 3rd floor, which overlooks Marcus's property, if you're wondering how I knew so much about his living habits. I know it sounds obsessive and a little creepy, but his house was also just a glance away from my monitor, so I couldn't help but look over from time to time. One night, it was a Wednesday night. I remember that distinctly. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of loud music. I sleep with my windows open, so that's probably how I woke up so easily. At first, I thought I was imagining it or it was part of a really vivid dream I was having, but I was wrong. I got out of bed and peeked out my window, and there they were. 7 or so cars lined up in Marcus's driveway. There was no mistaking it, he was having a party. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the type to complain about some noise. I've been to my fair share of house parties, but it was the middle of the week and the volume was insane. I figured I'd just go over, knock, and ask him to turn it down. I threw on a hoodie and walked over. It was a full-blown party. That much was clear from outside. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I pulled out my phone to text Marcus, but I decided against it, knowing he'd probably ignore me and give me some BS excuse the following morning. I knocked on the door again, harder this time. Still nothing. I reached for the handle, half expecting it to be locked, but to my surprise, the door swung open. Inside, the first thing I saw was a pile of shoes in the foyer. At least 10 pairs, but there was something off. There was literally no one in there. I moved further in, expecting to see people in the living room, maybe the kitchen, but it was completely empty. There weren't even any drinks left out. I could hear people over the music that was playing in the background, though, which I didn't understand. But then I really listened to it, and everything hit me all at once. It wasn't even music, really. It was a recording, a literal recording of people laughing, yelling, clinking glasses. The whole party was fake, all of it. But that didn't make sense to me. It still didn't explain the shoes or the cars. There were people in that house, which much was certain. I should have turned around right then, but I needed to know what was going on. I moved discreetly around the house until I saw a door that was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open, and it led down to the basement. I'm not sure how I knew, but something told me what I was looking for was downstairs. It was dark down those stairs, with the exception of a very faint light coming from somewhere I couldn't see. There was no reason to go down there, I knew that, but I did it anyway. I got to the bottom of the stairs and looked around. The light was coming from another door somewhere, deeper in the basement. I crept towards it, and as I got closer, I started to pick up on another noise I hadn't been able to hear earlier over the music. It sounded almost mechanical. It was this heavy, rhythmic grinding, like heavy machinery or a buzzsaw or something. I got a little closer, close enough to see through the crack. There were 3 people standing in there, looking across the room at something that was out of view. They were all older-looking guys, significantly older than Marcus. They were wearing heavy-duty work clothes and had on these protective goggles and thick rubber gloves. I also realized they were wearing what looked like work boots, even though I had seen all those other shoes upstairs. Under different circumstances, I would have assumed that they were construction workers. I really wanted to see what they were looking at, but it was too far out of view. After a few seconds of me just standing there, I started to pick up on this awful bleach smell, or some kind of cleaning solution. That's what did it for me. I started to feel this awful pit in my stomach, like my life was in danger. I can't explain it. I turned to leave, trying to be as quiet as possible. As I was finding my way back to the stairs, the light from behind me suddenly dimmed, like someone had shut the door behind me. I didn't actually hear the door over the music, but I felt it. I sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could. I ran through the house and burst out the front door. I didn't run directly to my house. I jumped my own fence and made it to the backyard. I slipped in through my side door, locking it behind me. My chest was pounding, but under no circumstances could I let Marcus or any of those other guys know it was me who had been snooping around. I gathered myself and went up to my office, making sure all the lights up there were off. I crouched down below the window and peeked over at Marcus's house. There was no one there. But then, a few minutes later, the front door flew open and like 8 guys poured out, scanning the yard, the driveway, the street. But Marcus wasn't with them. I could tell because everyone looked older, like those first guys I had seen. A few of them looked like they were arguing about something, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. One of the men actually shoved one of the other ones, and I thought they were about to start fighting in the street, but they didn't. Eventually, they all went back inside, and the music stopped soon after that. I stood at the window, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? The music wasn't playing anymore, and there was no real crime I could actually report. The thing I couldn't understand was how none of my other neighbors had a problem with the loud music, especially since most of them had children. I figured if they hadn't been able to hear it and I called the police, Marcus would know it was me. And the shoes, I had no idea what that was about either. The people I had seen were all wearing boots, so did they bring extra pairs of shoes just to leave in the foyer? I had too many questions, and I didn't know what to do, so I just went to bed. The next morning, I woke up and looked out my bedroom window. Every single car was gone, including Marcus's. I went upstairs to try and get some work done, but I couldn't concentrate and found myself looking over at Marcus's house every 5 seconds. After a few hours of his car not being there, I decided to go for a walk, partly to clear my head, but mostly to take some low-key glances through his windows. Nothing, though. Days passed, and Marcus still didn't return, or his car didn't at least. I was baffled with every passing day. I still couldn't figure out how my other neighbors had been able to sleep through all the noises that night, so I just straight up asked them. I went to a few houses and asked them if they had heard the party he had a few nights ago. No one knew what I was talking about even after I told them which house it was coming from and how late it was. I thought I was going crazy. That was a few months ago now. The crazy thing is Marcus still hasn't returned, and it's clear no one is maintaining his house, as the grass is starting to get really long, and there's an untouched pile of packages leaning against his front door. I don't know what to make of this. It could be nothing, but I feel like no one would go to such lengths to disguise what they were doing with a fake party unless it was something illegal. But would people going to such lengths really forget something as important as locking the front door? Maybe that's what those guys had been arguing about. I really have no idea, and the fact that none of my other neighbors seemed bothered by it makes me think I'm involved in some huge conspiracy or something. I know I'm just being paranoid, but I just have so many unanswered questions. When Marcus returns, if he ever does, I'm debating whether or not I should just go and straight up ask him.